Hello, everyone. So we're still waiting for results to come back for Georgia and North Carolina. Georgia, Biden is leading, and North Carolina, Trump is leading. But I would tend to say the election is pretty much over. Um, Biden is projected to be the 46th president of the United States. There's a narrow path for Trump going forward, and we'll get into all that. I mean, I just don't think it's terribly likely that Trump can somehow, you know, end up winning because I think too much has to go right for him. Um, it's just like he would have to win every battle going forward, and I don't think that that is going to happen given what's happened so far and how this, idea of mass voter fraud, it's just not really panning out in terms of the evidence, in terms of the legal battles thus far. I mean, it's still going to continue. The Republicans are going to fight tooth and nail. Trump will, go for as long as he can, trying to dispute the results. But you know, I just think thus far he hasn't had a lot of success in terms of the legality. They don't have much standing to bring a case, and I mean, it's just like they're not bringing any concrete evidence. They're just bringing suspicions that I think the Democrats must be committing fraud, but there's no specific allegations really. None that are really credible. So Pennsylvania and Georgia started swinging for Biden on Friday, and then PA was called, I believe, on Saturday for Biden. And I'm going to go over the vote as it stands right now, actually, because in PA, Biden is leading by like 50,000 votes, that looks like now. So, and we're going to get into all that. I mean, like the details of PA, because it's just their claims of fraud in PA are really not coming together with Trump. It's just not looking good there. So my guess would be Biden is, if any of these states are gonna change for Trump, it looks like PA is not that hopeful for him. Um, like I'm looking more. It's the legality, like in terms of the courts. Are they going to take this, their challenge seriously if there's not really a real case, real evidence being presented? But also the lead in the vote. If it's a very substantial margin, and I mean 50,000 is still fairly close, but that's a lot of votes where, and I'm going to get into how they count all this stuff, because this is just pretty much all the things that we know, all the votes that came in before election day. Even the mail-in ballots. It's all, these are all the votes that were received on election day. So, and I'll get into all that, of course. But yeah, in terms of the electoral vote overall, right now we have Joe Biden at 290, Donald Trump at 217. Uh, in Georgia, again, Georgia is not called, and Biden is leading by around 10,000 votes, more or less. Um, let's see. Let's look at some other closer races. I mean, Michigan is one where people are talking about like potential litigation for Trump. It's like, that might change the result. Well, Biden is leading by like that's over 100,000 votes right there. I mean, so at a certain point, how much of this fraud? It's like how much are you going? How can you discredit the election in this way where there's like hundreds of thousands of votes that could potentially, but for no reason whatsoever. By the way, it's just like I don't know what they are going to decide to do. Is it just going to be like any mail-in ballots that come in after election day? But that's not consequential, as I'll get into. But it's like, are they going to go after all the mail-in ballots? like, and for what reason again? Because my point being, I don't see how you could have this mass voter fraud, and in all these states that are pretty key, like Biden has a substantial lead. Like, this is not the 2000 election with Bush v. Gore. That was decided by one state, Florida, and that was a very close race. It was within the hundreds of votes. And by the way, Gore won that recount, so really Gore won Florida. It's just the Supreme Court handed it to Bush at the time. So, you know, we have such a great democracy here, right? But okay, so back to this race. It's just like these margins are so significant for Biden that I tend to say if Trump gets, one victory or two victories in a state, the most it could do is probably just knock down Biden's lead a little bit in the electoral vote, and then I suppose like the popular vote, they'll just say like we're going to discredit these ballots for no reason. I mean, I don't know why, but the most that could do, like, I don't think that could set Biden back so much that he is no longer within the 270 range, because you only need 270 electoral votes to win. And even if you take Pennsylvania away from Biden, with Nevada he has 270. So I'm just not seeing a real path to victory for Trump. It's narrow. It's possible. I just don't see it as very likely at this point. But Wisconsin, that was a little closer. That was decided by around 20,000 votes, and Biden's leading there. Arizona, people are saying that's pretty in dispute for some reason. I mean, like, Fox News, I guess, called it early, and then they're like, Fox News is not, but they don't like Trump. Well, okay. That doesn't mean it's wrong. It's like, just because these Trump supporters don't like the results, it's just like, they're all just bringing suspicions. There's nothing concrete. Anything that they're bringing forth, a lot of it's falling apart, their stories, but it's just like they're not even proving anything illegal happened. They're just like, oh, something shady is going on. Well, okay, it's like, if you want to talk about like stuff like ballot harvesting or whatever, it's like these are legal processes. Certain states allow ballot harvesting, which basically means people go door to door and collect ballots, and that's usually for people that are disabled and elderly. If the state allows that to happen, it's legal. So, there's nothing you can really... Each state has its own way of running the election. There's guidelines that they have to abide by, of course, but the states run the elections. They decide certain things like when the mail-in ballots get counted. In this case, I don't know if this was a problem before, but because of the influx of mail-in ballots and the pandemic, that they wanted to extend the deadline. So your ballot it has to be sent on election day. There's no getting around that, basically in any state. It has to be sent on election day, postmarked on election day. And they're just talking about when it's received at the place to be counted. They extended the deadline in PA. It was until like November 6th. So, and I'm going to get into all those details, because it's like if you're going to try and make the case that in itself is fraudulent, like accepting ballots after election day, you're going to see very quickly why that is not a good reason at all. First of all, the legality of it, again, like I don't think there's much of a case there to be said that it's illegal, that the state just can't do whatever it wants. Obviously, there are certain restrictions that the state can't just do anything, but if they decide and vote on it, like if certain election officials push for this, and there's nothing that they can do. It's a legal process. So there's not a lot they can do, because there's not a lot of evidence that I'm seeing. And a lot of the news organizations, including Fox News, are agreeing. So I just don't know what their path to victory is for Trump. I think at most you'll knock down Biden's lead, but it's not going to be that consequential in terms of it's going to switch for Trump. Um, okay, so in Arizona, Biden is leading by about 15,000 votes. And that's basically the state of the race. We're waiting on North Carolina and Georgia. Georgia's leaning Biden, excuse me. So what is the path to victory for Trump? I mean, because the courts, if it goes to the Supreme Court, I'm starting to think now that it's not necessarily a foregone conclusion that they're going to side with Trump, given the circumstances that they're in now, that all these states are in now. It was just, it's not like 2000 and Bush v. Gore. I mean, like, the Supreme Court, in order to hand Trump a victory, their decision would be so consequential, it would basically discredit so many of the state's election results. And again, what is the evidence for that? And if you're looking at, I mean, I didn't even talk about the popular vote, because the popular vote doesn't matter in this country anyways, but to the extent that it does, Biden is leading by like 5 million votes now, ahead of Trump. So he's actually already beating Hillary's disparity in 2016. She led Trump by about 3 million votes, but of course she lost the electoral vote. Now, Trump, of course, kept up. He did gain a lot more support than was expected. But I think that if you're going down this path of we're just going to discredit election results and Biden is leading by like 5 million votes and we're going to somehow hand it to Trump, because in trying to describe this, like, there's no point A to point B to point C. Like, there's no, I don't know how to describe how he gets there. I mean, I know certain things that can happen, but I'm talking about the likeliness that Trump walks away from this victorious. I just don't. The stars are not going to align in that way, because just so much has to happen and so much has to be discredited from what we've seen, and there's not a lot of evidence for that. And again, it's just, I think you could hand Trump a victory in one or two states. That depends on the electoral vote. I mean, like, or I'm sorry, that state's like electoral vote count. Like, Nevada has 6 electoral votes. So I mean, if Trump were to win there, that is not consequential at all. It's like if he gets Nevada, and Pennsylvania, let's say, but Georgia, I mean, Georgia's going to have to go through a recount, and I don't think that Trump will win that recount. I mean, we'll see, but they're talking about like some kind of miracle scenario for Trump, and again, I think if that were to happen, if just through sheer wonkery alone, and using the legal system, Trump were to win, that would cause mass unrest. And I hate to say it, but it's like, when we look at when we were in the Iraq War, I was about to say Venezuela, but this Iraq War is an even better example, just because at the height of the Iraq War, we were saying riots are a good sign. That means that the surge is working and that we're going to get this government out. It's like, it makes no sense what the Republicans say, because it just doesn't apply in our own country. With Venezuela, they view Maduro as not the legitimate leader, even though there were international observers there that for the election, and I mean, they're saying Maduro stole it, right? Well, okay, fine. They're saying basically, like, people revolting against the government in Venezuela because they support Juan Guaido. Trump does. I mean, so they're saying rioting and going against the government in that instance is fine because Maduro is so bad. Well, if you're going to have a situation where Trump is basically doing a coup, this is kind of what it is. I mean, because based on what evidence? Again, just because I'm going to go through all of that details in just a second, but what are the actual claims being put forth? Is it actually going to be consequential in terms of changing the election results? Because, again, it's like if you could prove some voter fraud, fine, do that, but I'm saying on this mass scale where there's so much fraud that if it wasn't for the fraud, Trump would have obviously won. That I think that is delusional to think, because how is that possible? In all these different states, I mean, of course, if it's a vote cast for Trump, that's perfectly legal. It's like they're never going to question that, of course, even though Trump told people to vote twice, which was illegal. So, and again, I don't know if I mentioned this in the last video I said, but there's no consistency because in Arizona, they wanted to count this this county in Arizona that was like pro-Trump, and then they stopped the count for some reason. They probably were just taking breaks because you have to work endlessly to count all these ballots. It takes hours and hours. It doesn't just take a day or two. In a lot, because you have all these mail-in ballots, and there's so much to be done. To make sure that it's actually legitimate and everything. Like don't you want it to be thorough, right? But it's like they just want the results as soon as possible. But anyways, there was this county in Arizona that the Trump people wanted counted because they said, oh yeah, of course this will swing the election for Arizona, and because it's a pro-Trump county, so they're outside the place where they're counting. I'm not sure where it was, but and they're like, start the count, and then in PA, that they view that as illegitimate because it's in Philadelphia and things go crazy in Philadelphia, I guess, and they're outside screaming, stop the count, stop the count. So they only want a result that they like, the Trump supporters. I mean, it's not based on any principle of justice or like, oh yeah, like there's this definite allegation against this county, and like we know they were not doing the process correctly. Like they just want the result to be Trump wins. And again, it's just like these legal challenges have not had a lot of success thus far. I mean, hardly any at all. In Pennsylvania, as I'll get into, like there's potential for more litigation. But I think down the line, it's like they're going to start ruling out what they can bring forth, because they got to bring something more specific other than just like these suspicions that the Democrats are acting illegitimately and committing fraud. It's just like there's got to be actual evidence, actual specific things, and not just a suspicion. So what are the things that could be done for Trump? Because if the courts are not going to work out for him, and I think it's just my view in terms of the Supreme Court is like they just don't want to have a say in this election, because if it comes to them, deciding either way, they don't want to have to be the arbiter of that, and like especially if people are going to vote like for Trump, and then like that completely is upheaval. But I think even in terms of confirming Biden is the president, I don't think that the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court does not want to have a say in that, and does not. They just don't want to have to define what those parameters are. They'd rather like the states run the elections. The courts. I mean, Rudy Giuliani is out there at his botched press conference, which was supposed to be at the Four Seasons Hotel, and then was at the Four Seasons landscaping company. So just brilliant. But he's there, and he's like, "Oh, I was like, courts decide the elections. What about people? What about votes? Because what is specifically happening here? Again, so let's get into these details. But again, I just to close up here. I mean, in terms of if Trump can't win in the Supreme Court, if he can't, if the vote, I'm sorry, if the states basically don't act on Trump's behalf, and basically when the certification process comes around and they just are just like, yeah, we're not going to certify these mail-in ballots, so then we're going to hand it to Trump. Um, that's something that could potentially happen. But if that doesn't happen, which is not that likely, I would say. I mean, they're probably going to certify the results that we see now. The state legislatures could potentially find a new slate of electors for the Electoral College. If you have a state legislature that is run by Republicans, they could potentially just find new electors that will vote for Trump. And I mean, I don't know that they even have to present a reason for that. Um, it would seem to be pretty unconstitutional. I mean, I don't think that the founders didn't want the legislatures to choose the president, because I mean, like, we vote for the legislatures, we vote for people in Congress. That's certainly true, but in a way, that's kind of just like elitists coming in and saying, like, we're going to decide who is the leader of the country because we know best. So that's not. I don't know if there's any constitutional backing for that. I mean, it's possible that they could just find a new slate of electors, and it just goes by unnoticed. Um, because usually, I mean, like, faithless electors are not very consequential in terms of affecting the outcome of an election, which is when the elector goes against that state's vote for the president. So usually, like, yeah, like the faithless electors, they aren't that consequential. There were, like, I think the most faithless electors in 2016, but again, that didn't really have an effect. I would tend to say, if that were to happen, like, I think they're talking about that with Arizona, because Arizona is, like, pretty much run by Republicans, even though it went to Biden in this case. That's 11 electoral votes, I believe. Not terribly consequential, because again, Biden, he doesn't have to maintain a lot of these states to go forward. I mean, he has to just hold on to like a few, like, or I don't know what I'm saying. It's all very confusing. But my point being that you have, like, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada, 6 states right there, and they're all for Biden. So if you give Trump a victory on a few of those things, like, Biden only needs one. He only needs 270. So if he's going to end up with a 306 electoral lead, you can do the damage you can to try and discredit the mail-in ballots, but I mean, that's not going to be consequential in terms of affecting the outcome of the election. I think the Republicans, like, they kind of just want to delegitimize this process. They're out to suppress the vote in any way possible. They've been always doing that, trying to keep people from being registered to vote. The voter ID laws. They're always out to suppress the vote, because when voter turnout is low, the Republicans usually win. So this is all very old stuff. It's just kind of being ramped up to crazy levels that we haven't seen before. I just don't think that it's not enough to affect the outcome of the election, I don't think. So that's just the way it is. And so let's get to these details with Pennsylvania, because it's amazing to me that these very simple things are not being stated in the public discourse. And it's just like, if you were to outline this for everyone, like, you could see how this whole idea of the voter fraud, and certainly at a mass scale, is just not practical. It's not happening. It's not. and it's not based on any foundation of evidence. So let's go to Market Watch. Republicans secure apparently inconsequential Supreme Court intercession in Pennsylvania vote count. Republicans pressed ahead with a post-election day legal offensive, with the Trump campaign naming a conservative activist to lead the battle in the Pennsylvania GOP, making another emergency request that the U.S. Supreme Court intervene in that state's count. The developments came as President Trump fell behind Democrat Joe Biden in Pennsylvania and other battlegrounds, putting Biden on the cusp of the presidency. Litigation filed by the Trump campaign and other Republicans has shown little prospect of turning the tide so far, and legal experts from both parties describe the efforts as a last stand. The Republican Party of Pennsylvania filed a new emergency request at the U.S. Supreme Court on Friday, asking the justices to order that state ballots arriving in a 3-day window after Election Day be held separate. State officials preparing for the possibility of post-election litigation already pledged to do this, but the new Republican court filing alleges it is currently unclear whether all 67 county boards of election are following the state's instructions. Justice Samuel Alito, in an order issued Friday evening, instructed the counties to comply. Now, this is the thing, is that these votes that are coming in after Election Day that everyone's so going crazy about, it's like, oh, this is so much fraud. They're finding these ballots. They're finding them. Well, they either come in or they don't come in. It's like, I don't know what that means. You found them. They're being sent out, and they're received, on Election Day or maybe after. But the point here is, the ballots that are coming in after Election Day are being sequestered, it's called. So in other words, the vote count that you're seeing with Pennsylvania is not including the ballots that come in after Election Day. Those are being held separate, and they're going to be added to the count, eventually with the certification process probably. So really, I mean, Biden is probably going to end up with a bigger lead, probably a much bigger lead than you see. I mean, but that's the other thing, is that these ballots that come in after Election Day, not a lot of them come in after Election Day. Like, it's not gonna really change much, because we're talking about very little votes and a little number of votes in comparison to all the others. So they're just basically trying to pick at anything that they can. The Republicans are trying to pick any little hair in the soup, or whatever you want to say. Like, even if it doesn't affect anything, even if Trump can't win PA, they're just going to be like, okay, we're going to say that these ballots come in, they come in after Election Day. Well, they're not being counted, they're being sequestered, but we don't like them anyways. Well, it's not enough to really do much. So they're just trying to cause chaos. It's essentially like whack-a-mole. They just want to get some kind of victory in one of the states that they're going crazy, putting out all these legal challenges. And it's like throwing shit at the wall. It's like seeing what sticks. That's what it is. Now, in terms of the delays in processing the ballots, because every state did it a little differently. A state like Florida or Arizona, they count the mail-in ballots as soon as they come in, and they're basically done counting on Election Day. I mean, some of the count is still going on. I think in Arizona it's not completely done, but basically, they don't have that extended deadline like in PA. Your ballot had to be received on Election Day in Arizona and Florida and other ones. If it wasn't received on Election Day, it's not going to be counted in that state. So in terms of PA, people are probably going to be like, why can't they just count the mail-in ballots as they come in? I mean, this is ridiculous. Why are they waiting until Election Day to do this? I mean, isn't that kind of ridiculous? Well, if you're going to blame the Democrats for that, I have some news for you. In Pennsylvania, Biden is now leading by nearly 7,000 votes. This was an old article, so he's leading by more now. His lead is expected to grow as mail-in ballots continue to be counted across the state, especially in Democratic-leaning counties in eastern Pennsylvania and in Allegheny County, where Pittsburgh is located. We are going to accurately count every single ballot, said Pennsylvania Secretary of State Kathy Boockvar, I'm not sure how I pronounce that name, during a press conference on Wednesday. Why the delay in counting these ballots? Due to state law, election officials in the state were legally unable to even begin processing, let alone count ballots until Election Day. Democrats in the state, including Governor Tom Wolf, tried to pass legislation that would allow counties to begin pre-canvassing ballots to verify their validity before Election Day, but were obstructed by the Republican-led legislature. The Pennsylvania GOP has attempted to blame Democrats for the delay. State Representative Carrie Benninghoff falsely claimed that the delay was a failure of the Wolf administration and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. However, his party controls the legislature. Some Republican lawmakers even went as far as to call on Boockvar to resign because they disagree with her management of the election. Obviously, Republicans and Democrats at each other's throats, that's nothing new. But if you're all upset about these late ballots coming in, then you gotta blame the Republican legislatures that make it so that they can't count the ballots earlier. I mean, what else can I say? Governor Wolf wanted to do this. He wanted to make it so that they could count the ballots earlier, and he was blocked by the Pennsylvania Republican Party that run the state legislature. So I just don't know how much clearer you can make that. I have no problem really with counting the ballots as they come in. I feel like, get the process done as quickly as humanly possible. It's like I would have it so that you count the ballots early and you extend the deadline. So it's just ridiculous. But then the poll observers, that was another big one in Pennsylvania with the Republicans, and they're like, oh, well, our poll observers, they aren't allowed in, and that's ridiculous. What's going on here? Well, as it turns out, this is the Financial Times, by the way, really, really far left sources I'm citing right here. Financial Times, federal judge gives Trump Pennsylvania litigation a tepid response. Donald Trump's litigation in Pennsylvania got a skeptical hearing from a federal judge on Thursday evening. The campaign sued in federal court to halt the counting of votes in Philadelphia, claiming its observers were not being given access. The lawsuit came after earlier litigation on the issue in state court. Paul Diamond, a George W. Bush appointee, sounded exasperated during an emergency hearing on the lawsuit. He asked the Trump campaign lawyer whether its observers were in the counting room. There's a non-zero number of people in the room, the lawyer replied. Judge Diamond ultimately extracted the answer yes and remarked, I'm sorry, then what's your problem? Judge Diamond pushed the parties to agree to an immediate settlement to avoid the need for further litigation. The deal allows up to 60 observers, each for Republicans and Democrats. He dismissed the lawsuit without prejudice, meaning it could be refiled in light of the agreement. And then the judge says, if we can show the world that both sides can act reasonably to resolve this, that would be wonderful. Well, best of luck there. Because, look, the Republicans are trying to pick apart everything that they can. They're talking about with the poll observers, like, oh, if you're going to go from basically they weren't allowed in, well, actually they were because they said in court that they were. Then they're like, oh, well, it wasn't meaningful because we were too far away. We had to use binoculars to look and stuff. Well, look, they cited the, social distancing and coronavirus as a need for doing that. So it's like, did you not know that was going to happen? Like, did you not, did you just learn about this now? and now you're bringing it up. Like, did you not see that coming? So, but again, it's just like the Democrat people, they didn't get any special treatment. You know, it's like the Republican observers were there just like the Democrat people were. And again, it's just like just that fact alone does not prove fraud that like they're kept far away. Um, you know, like people when you go to work at the polls, like you're basically sworn in. I mean, and everything you do is under the microscope. In Pennsylvania, they have a live stream. They have a live stream of people of like where the vote counting happens. It's all documented. So this idea that there's something nefarious going on, like find the evidence for it and win in court. It's like, what do you want me to tell you? It's because you can talk all day long and go on cable news, and say some stuff that may or may not be shady. I don't know, but like, unless it's gonna actually hold up in court, like I don't care. It's I care about what is the outcome gonna be. How are how are the results being influenced by what's happening in the legal process of what's going on? And I mean, again, I would be skeptical if a state court is going to be like, we're just going to discredit these mail-in ballots, unless there was a very good reason that's well explained, and they show how the fraud was real. Like, I'm going to be skeptical because I think judges are just more activists than they really let on. And for certain judges, I think it's not beyond them to basically just hand the victory over to Trump, at least for that state. Um, Again, it's just like I'm willing to look at the evidence, and my contention is there could be certain elements of fraud, like probably in every election there's fraud, but on a mass scale like this that would actually impact the results, I don't think that is something that happens. And it's just the legal experts seem to agree with me. So another aspect of PA was this PA postal worker had a signed affidavit alleging voter fraud. I think he was saying that the postmaster of wherever county he was in, um, this postal worker was saying that they tried to backdate the postmark so that it was on November 4th, which is the day after Election Day, they would change it to November 3rd. But then it turns out this postal worker recants his statement, and he was getting money from GOP donors on a GoFundMe site. The GoFundMe people took it down once they realized that this guy lied and just he recanted his affidavit. So people and other people like Project Veritas, who this postal worker went to, like they paid him like money, but like Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is offering $1 million for people to come forth with evidence of voter fraud. Like, does that incentive not seem perverse to you? This idea that we're gonna just pay people money to come forward, and who knows if that's legit or not? Like, you're just gonna get people that want a lot of money. That's all it is. So the Republicans, like, I think they like to just kind of play the media narrative. Like they obviously feel like the media is biased against them, and the media does have kind of a establishment bias, and like they're liberal on social issues. They don't like Trump's abrasiveness. They don't necessarily. It's like the policies are a different story. But like the Republicans, like I think they just play the Republican. I'm sorry, the Republicans play the media narrative, just basically pushing their side of things as much as possible, and then it's like the more you repeat something, the more true it becomes. Like I don't see because like all these stories are falling apart. All these this evidence, to the extent that it's even evidence at all, is falling apart. So if they're already off to a bad start, like I just don't see what path to victory Trump really has. It's like if there was like potential, like in this case in PA, like they can refile litigation, but given their track record, it's just like it's not looking good. Like I just don't see what the path to victory for Trump is. It's narrow. It's certainly not impossible, but I think it's wishful thinking on the Trump supporters' part because just like all these things have to line up exactly in order to just even knock down Biden's electoral vote lead. So, in terms of affecting the outcome of the election, I don't see what Trump can do. And again, by affecting the outcome, I mean Trump wins. There's just not a lot Trump can do to discredit that fact. It seems to be. But I want to talk about a few other things real quick. I didn't mention the ballot initiatives in the election that were very positive. We just legalized in a lot of different states. It actually won the ballot initiative in every state it was in, including New Jersey. Oregon decriminalized all drugs, I believe, or maybe it was just magic mushrooms. I don't know. And then, interestingly enough, Florida raised the minimum wage, even though that state went for Trump. So it seems to me rather that like the people are really actually more progressive than they let on, or at least on the policy issues. They probably have a certain idea of Biden. They think he's like far left and communist. And with Florida, I was talking about before, like that seems to be the case with a lot of those Latino voters. They have a particular view of socialism and communism, so there's just nothing Biden could have done to convince those people. But that state raised the minimum wage on their ballot initiative. So it just goes to show you whether you consider yourself on the left or the right, on issues that help average working people, most people are in agreement. Like our minimum wage is $7.25 an hour right now, which comes to, I think on MSNBC, Ali Velshi said it comes to around $15,000 a year on a minimum wage job. Like, and I know the Republicans are always like, I was like, well, you're not supposed to live on a minimum wage job. It's like, okay, well, do you want only high schoolers working at McDonald's? Do you only want your Big Mac after 3? It's like, people, if you're working full time, you should make enough money to live, and $15,000 a year is nothing. I mean, like, $25,000 a year is practically nothing. So you gotta have a situation for people where they at least have enough money to live, and people agree with that, regardless of who they voted for president, obviously, because it won pretty significantly. When we talk about Ohio, John Kasich was a huge never-Trumper, and he was, batting hard for Biden. He talked at the DNC. John Kasich, a Republican, talked at the DNC. And what did that give us? Ohio went for Trump. So he didn't deliver his own state, John Kasich, and he goes on TV now and he's whining about how, socialism hurt the Democrats, and that's why you're seeing this kind of underperformance from Biden and the Democrats in Congress. But look at the actual results here. The centrists are the ones that lost. All of the people that endorsed Medicare for All won their races. And these aren't just safe blue areas. Cori Bush in Missouri? Like, how does that happen? Every single candidate that endorsed Medicare for All won their race. So, I'm not having this whole, like, we have to be more moderate, we have to compromise with the Republicans, we got to learn how to work together and be bipartisan. This is exactly what's been going on for years, for decades. And the Republicans are never going to work with you. No matter how reasonable and moderate you are, you're never going to convince them. It's the one thing that I always give people to just credit for. Like, they're just never going to work with you because they're always going to call you socialist. So you might as well just fight for the people and be progressive. I liked Michael Moore's letter that he sent to Biden. I mean, it's just like, I don't think Biden is going to be that progressive. I think we should push him as much as possible. But I'm not going to be naive and act like Biden is going to be FDR. That's just not the reality. And especially considering, like, the Senate is looking to be Republican. It's 49-48 right now. They're going to obstruct everything. And as a matter of fact, I think they're going to probably try and impeach Biden at some point. So before he's even won the election, because this was obviously before the election, like, they were talking about, like, the possibility of Biden becoming president. They're going to try and impeach him. So the Republicans are not going to work with you, rather. And again, I go back to stimulus. Like, Mitch McConnell actually did say after the election, like, I think we should try and work towards a stimulus. And that's more or less, I think, just lip service. But the Democrats need to hold that against him. And during this whole time, I mean, I understand that you have to defend democracy. You got to keep Trump from doing a coup and just discrediting the entire election. So, you know, it is important. And it's very delicate the way you do that, because you don't want to, like, legitimize any of Trump's claims, especially if there's just no evidence to back that up. But anyways, I'm saying, like, you shouldn't let the Republicans dictate the entire frame of debate that's going on right now. And they're all talking about the election and trying to discredit it and get Trump to win. I understand you have to defend that. But you also have to make the positive point of pushing for stimulus. Right now, when businesses are in dire danger of closing, I mean, not even really because of a lockdown, but because they're probably going to go under. They're not going to have enough money. So you have to tell the American people that you're fighting for them and show them that. And it's not just about letting the Republicans run amok and then, like, we're trying to control them as much as possible, like a mad dog. The Democrats have to show some leadership and show that the Republicans aren't for them. It's like Mitch McConnell. If you say we should work on a stimulus, then let's do it. Let's get it rolling. But instead, Democrats are too tepid about everything. And I think they saw this victory that they had. I mean, like, it was a pretty underwhelming victory. And, you know, just like with the campaign, they kept Biden out of the spotlight, more or less. I mean, like, Biden is showing up a little bit more now because he's the president-elect and he's giving certain press conferences and saying what we should do with COVID and all. But I think they're just being very careful about what they say, and again, I get that you don't want to legitimize Trump's claims about the election. I get that, but you've got to change what people's focus is on right now. You know, like, the best way to kind of show that this whole election fraud idea is ridiculous is to just kind of pivot away from it entirely and bring it back to stimulus, bring it back to the American people need help. And, like, the people are going to be for that. They're going to see that the Democrats are at least fighting for them and they at least care about trying to get that forward. But I don't think the Democrats are that strong fighters. They just are not going to do that, I think. I mean, to the extent that they do, it's going to be like Mitch McConnell letting it happen. Basically, like, letting the stimulus happen so that he can get credit for it. But just, again, this idea that socialism is what made the Democratic win underwhelming. Like, look at the makeup of the party now. Who won their races? Who lost? The centrists ran on nothing. All that they were talking about is that they are better than Trump, and this was all a referendum on Trump, and we're just better than him. So you have to actually run on something. You have to run on some kind of issue, whether it be Medicare for all. But Biden, listen, if Biden had talked about raising the minimum wage just a little bit more, I'm make it a lot more, but if he had just pushed that a little bit more, that could have given him Florida. Because obviously Florida wants the minimum wage raised. If he had made that a bigger the cornerstone of his campaign, I think Biden would have done much better. But instead, it was just a campaign of nothing. It was just basically a ham sandwich versus Trump. And it's crazy. I mean, it has to say a lot about the Democratic Party that during this time where you have an incompetent leader, you have a pandemic and depression, that the Dems like barely eked it out. It's like it's a significant enough lead where I just don't think there's a much chance that Trump can win. Like, there's not a huge path to victory for him because, again, he can knock down Biden's numbers a little bit, but I think he'll still be within that threshold. But listen, the Biden people and the Democratic Party in general, like, they are not socialist. They're not progressive, and I'm going to fight back against that entirely because, listen to me, if they were progressive and socialist, I would not be complaining right now. if the AOCs of the country ran the party and actually had power and how things get influenced in the policy, then I wouldn't be complaining. I would be happy that we have a good, strong opposition party. But instead, it's just very tepid, and I think, given that Mitch McConnell and the Republicans, they're going to do everything in their power to obstruct Biden, keep him from accomplishing anything, essentially. Um, the response from the Democrats is going to be to compromise, like it always has been, because during this time of crisis, they're going to say like it's an emergency that we deal with the American people. We have to get help to them, like I said before, but instead of being more bold and showing the American people like we really, it's not just that we want to like give you a check and then forget about you. We actually want to provide you with help that will be meaningful, that will help you stay, afloat, at least afloat during this pandemic. I mean, like, you have to do a little bit more than just kind of get people to make it week by week. I feel like you got to give them a little bit more of a cushion so that they aren't worried about the future so much, and do what Europe did and nationalize the wages. But the Democrats have never been this bold, the way I'm describing, at least not in a long time. So, final thing I'll say is it's looking like Biden is going to be the 46th president. I mean, I just don't see what else Trump can do. I've gone over in detail just like certain methods he can do to lower Biden's electoral vote lead, but that's not going to be consequential in the end. It because all these states at play here, and Biden pretty much only needs one. He needs to only hold on to one, pretty much, and he'll have 270. So I just don't know what else could happen.